Hello, I'm Rob Califf, and I want to welcome you to this next segment of the Life and Times of Cardiologists. As all of you know, this has been a lot of fun for me to interview important people in cardiology who have things to say about their careers, what they've learned, impart wisdom to people who might be watching, and sometimes even tell some humorous stories about their lives that are meaningful to them and to other people. So today we have Paul Armstrong with us. We're here at the American College of Cardiology in Chicago, kind of a town that Dr. Armstrong likes to be in, as I've learned. Welcome to the show.
Good to be with you, Rob.
So, as you know, Paul, the purpose of this is really to learn about what motivates you, what you've learned along the way that other people might profit from. It's always interesting to start with one's origins. You seem like a Canadian through and through.
That's fair. I grew up not so far from here on another Great Lake, Lake Superior, in a small town in northern Ontario, and sort of gradually worked my way to the eastern part of the country, but that's where I grew up.
What did your parents do for a living?
Well, my dad was a bookkeeper in a pulp and paper mill, and my mother was a nurse, and nobody really had ever gone to university, and this was a very small town, 25,000 people, and so they were keen on me getting an education, and so helped along the way.
You weren't an only child, were you?
No, I had a sister who was a little younger, and we, as I say, lived in a small place. In fact, the principal source of amusement was either the public library, and then when I got bored with school, the snooker hall. So those were the two sort of places I spent my time.
I didn't have any idea that you had talent at that sport. Do you still play?
Yes, I do. The eye-hand coordination served me well when I chose my field. That's right.
That's interesting. Now, growing up, what happened around the dinner table with your family?
I think that we talked about a little bit about the world, a little bit about education. Always came up. My dad had to quit school and go back and work the farm. His father died when he was in about grade 9 or 10, so he was never able to finish high school. And so I learned, and I only had one grandparent that survived. Of course, in those days, life expectancy was substantially less than what you and I enjoyed. So we talked about trying to make good for yourself, trying to do better than your parents, and try to be upwardly mobile and find your way in the world.
Now, we often talk about Canada and the U.S. As a kid growing up in a small town in Canada, what were your impressions about the United States?
Well, I remember my first trip to your country, which was on a bus, and I remember losing my wallet on the bus, which had all my savings from my paper route, because I was going to Duluth, Minnesota. And then when we really got to the big town, we went to Minneapolis. I remember the Fauché Tower and Minneapolis as being this huge city, and experiences of more shopping, more broader experiences. But of course, Minnesota wasn't all that different from northern Ontario, and so it took some time for me to experience the broader heterogeneity of your country.
Now, were you religious when you were growing up?
Yes, I was. We were in the United Church of Canada, and so Sunday school and being baptized and then sort of officially welcomed into the church was part of it, and that's where our sports occurred, and that's where our summer camps, where I learned how to swim and canoe and other things. So church and hockey, of course. All of us played hockey about the time we could walk, and so I played on a lot of hockey teams, but certainly church hockey was part of that.
Church hockey, hard for me to imagine having watched this now move into the southeast of the U.S. where you have these people that are paid to beat up on the other team as a part of the sport. Did you have those guys in church hockey who were assigned to take out the other?
No, we didn't. We were pretty. I mean, we played hard and we played fast, but we played pretty clean, and it was a good environment, and the coaches and the sense of camaraderie and holding up your end and being a team member were part of it.
Now, when did you decide you wanted to be a doctor?
Well, Rob, I actually, the transition was an interesting one, I think, maybe worth spending a moment on. I had not understood what I wanted to do, but I did realize after reading most of the books I could find in the public library that psychology and the battle for the mind was interesting. And about the time I was in my senior high school years, the guidance counselor who had rescued me from the snooker halls and convinced me I should pay attention to my education came and visited my parents and said, "This young man apparently has some talent and we should send him away, and he's interested in psychology, but he really should be a psychiatrist because he'd have to go to medical school and that would be good for everybody." And so he convinced my parents to participate, and we all sort of put our collective thoughts and resources, and I spent a lot of summers working my way through this process. So I was sent off to Queen's University in Kingston, halfway between Toronto and Montreal, with the idea that I would go into medicine and win the battle for the mind. So that was the plan.
And this is jumping ahead a little bit, but when did you conclude that you were not cut out to be a psychiatrist?
So we weren't very wealthy. In fact, we were in need. So I had spent 7 summers in the pulp and paper industry, and in the last 2 years of medical school, there was an opportunity to go and work in a psychiatric hospital year-round, work your room and board off, and then get some money in the summer. And so this would be the 60s, just as phenothiazines were coming in. So I was participating in things that, the electric shock therapy was one thing, but participating in leucotomies and other things, it was kind of one flew over the cuckoo's nest, Jack Nicholson. It was extraordinary. And so after that experience, I realized that the battle for the mind I could not win, and I turned to other things.
Yeah, it's interesting in a way. I was going to be a clinical psychologist
until
the end of undergraduate school, and then I worked in a state prison for 2 summers and realized that the rewards were long-term, and it was a real struggle to make progress and hard to see it. So I gravitated to something with a more immediate return on investment of energy.
So we have something more in common than I knew, because we have a lot in common, but I didn't know that.
Well, in a way, your description of growing up in Canada fits my just sort of simple-minded view of something that seems very Canadian to me, which is a lot of, I would call it old-fashioned ethics, and maybe even a little bit of rigidity oriented around the church and all those kind of things. But then you're in a snooker hall at the same time, where you've got the rough-shod Canadians with the cold winters, and those two things sort of coexist. Is that an unfair depiction of?
Well, I don't think it is. I think you can learn a lot about life in a snooker hall, and you can learn a lot about life in a summer job with men on a labor gang, and I think relating to people and different kinds of people, I just think it's exploring parts of yourself in different environments and starting to feel comfortable that there aren't a lot of environments that you don't feel uncomfortable in.
So you told me before we started this interview that you're about to celebrate your 45th wedding anniversary. When did you meet Bev, who I think is the strength of the two of you, to tell you the truth?
She's unquestionably my most valuable asset, and my friend and mate, and also a very good sailor. But I met Beverly, our families actually knew each other before we became involved romantically, in fact, in this town in northern Ontario. Her father was a bank manager, and so she was very flexible, moved every few years, and so we began to connect in a different way while I was in the last year of medical school. And so we started going out together. She was at a different university, and And then we got married while I was finishing my junior internship in Toronto, and she was teaching at the time. And she's been just a wonderful partner and very supportive of my career, and of course a wonderful mother of our 2 children that I don't think I could have successfully been a father without her tremendous contributions.
So you followed the plan, although the deviation from being a psychiatrist.
Right.
Did someone in medical school influence you a lot as to your choice of where you headed?
Well, certainly I had important role models that convinced me that medicine and the pathophysiologic aspects of medicine and contributing in a way was important. And as I moved into my senior medical school and internship, a man by the name of Jack Parker, who was a cardiologist that had a tremendous influence on me, he transfected me with the clinical investigative gene. And another man inspired me in the mysteries of the heart and what you could learn in the catheterization laboratory. And so having thought about medicine and then had these 2 people influence me in cardiovascular medicine, I think that kind of set the tone for
Who was the second person besides Jack Parker?
Second person was a lovely man in Toronto who he's not well known, but he was a wonderful teacher, and he could make the patients come alive, and he was inspiring, and he loved his patients, and he just glowed with the enthusiasm for the care of patients and the mysteries and the opportunities to investigate them and to come back and provide answers to some of those mysteries. And I just thought that was a wonderful thing to do. Yeah.
So you went then from your house staff experience in Toronto to where? Where did you do your fellowship?
So I went back to my alma mater and did some more internal medicine training. And then my mentor, Jack Parker, decided that I should train in your country. And so I went on a trip. He was giving lectures. At that time, he had been investigating angina and myocardial ischemia. We were putting catheters in the coronary sinus. I was doing cardiac catheterization at a fairly early stage in my career. He'd learned from Mason Soanes, and so we were doing that approach to the heart, doing a lot of investigation. And so we went to Boston, and we went to the NIH, and we went to Hopkins. And as it turned out, I ended up applying and getting a job with the Mass General, and had a wonderful experience there in terms of 2 years of training with many people who I continue to be friends with. As you know, these fellowships and the connections you make are lifelong, and so that was very special.
Who were the key people at MGH when you were there?
Well, of course, the Roman DeSanctis was the cardiologist, but I had the opportunity to meet Paul Dudley White, and Paul White would climb 3 flights to the Ether Dome where cardiology rounds were once a year and give a case history of hearts and the long-term follow-up from his book. Ed Bland of Bland Jones was there, and the wonderful surgical team, and Charles Sanders, whose brother was Barefoot Sanders, who was LBJ's lawyer, was the director of the cardiac cath lab, and Ed Haber was the chief of cardiology, a biochemist, and he was also influential. You would go in and take your work, and he was balding, but I thought his forehead wrinkled, and he would look at an abstract, devour it, know nothing about it, and in 5 minutes give you a critique. And I would always think he had an extracerebral lobe because his head wrinkled, and his insights were so profound and so dramatic, and they just were razor sharp. So these people were outstanding.
Seriously, I didn't know you and Charles Sanders intersected. You know, he's in the Raleigh-Durham area.
Yes. We went to GSK and then other things, and but he was a wonderful mentor for me. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So now you are trained up. You've been at the Mass General, the mecca of
right.
American medicine.
Yeah.
You needed to get a real job at that point.
Well, and my mentor had put a hook on me, and so I'd had funding from the Ontario government and the Heart and Stroke Foundation, so it was pretty clear that they were going to pull me back. But Ed Haber said, "Now, just a minute. You're not ready to go to Canada. You need to go to finishing school." And I said, "Well, what's that?" He said, "You need to go to England. I want you to go to R.B. Leatham, and one of the fathers of clinical cardiology and auscultation, and I want you to see how the British do cardiology. And then I think you'd be ready to go back to Canada and do a good job." So we had a wonderful year in London, and had a great professional and personal experience. And then I went back to my alma mater after that experience.
And your first job was doing what? Working in the cath lab?
First job was actually I opened the coronary care unit at that hospital. Did a lot of invasive work, but basically there was a bit of a ward, and we closed it off, and I decided that there would be just a few attendings, and so really kind of anchored a CCU that didn't really exist, and began teaching and learning, and also doing some studies, often studies that were, at that time, as you know, looking at hemodynamics. We'd been influenced, of course, by Gene Braunwald's work. We were protecting the ischemic myocardium. There was a lot of cardiogenic shock in those days. We were looking after and investigating patients in the acute coronary setting. So that's where I got my first start.
So you were one of those guys. When I was coming along as a medical student, they told me that blood clots didn't cause heart attacks. And you were about, of course, at that point, you were already a full-fledged attending. How did we miss that for so long?
You know, I think it was this incredible notion that if you put a catheter in the left ventricle, that you would produce refractory ventricular arrhythmias and the patient would die. And I remember like it was yesterday, going to the old Atlantic City meetings where Jay Cohn, who was the first man that I can remember that put a catheter in the left ventricle, said, you know, we should do this, we should understand this. And so we got going with that sort of thing, and then of course doing the angiography, and then of course reperfusion.
Now I first ran into you, I think, when you know, we'd sort of been through the early streptokinase phase, and there were early reperfusion trials looking at the drug TPA, and you were a guy, I was working with the Genentech version, and you were working with at the time, the Burroughs Wellcome version. Essentially the same stuff, a little biologically different. What were you thinking during those times?
So I'd made the transition by then to come to Toronto. I'd been given an opportunity to lead a division of cardiology and develop some research culture at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. Wonderful place. And there was a club, coronary care unit club of hospitals, but the hospitals didn't work very well together. And we had been looking at some of the studies of Franz van der Werf and others, the coronary thrombolysis and the first TIMI trial, and said, you know, the target organ is really the left ventricle. Why don't we get a randomized clinical trial? I knew nothing about it much, except that I wanted to bring people together, so we brought key people together, went to McMaster, to Mike Gent, and said, how do we do this? Went to Genentech, and they said, well, you're not smart enough or experienced enough, we won't give you your product. And so I went to Burroughs Wellcome, and they invested in us, and we did a trial called TPAT, Toronto TPA trial, randomized trial that showed that heart function improved. And you may remember or may not remember that the study was published as a lead article in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, and two fellows that I'd never met wrote the editorial. One was Eric Topol, and the other was Rob Califf.
So what did we say?
Well, I think you said that this idea seems to be sensible. It deserves a chance. We think the study's okay, and they could have done some things a little better, but by and large, we believe it. And then, of course, after that, as you know, we got to get engaged in bigger things.
And what are your before we come back to the training of people, which I think is actually, from my view, your greatest legacy, let's talk a little bit about those early days of how the group came together that formed the Gusto trial. What are your memories of how this really happened? I had obviously been working with Eric on trials that were smaller, and we got the opportunity to do this big trial. We had never worked together, and suddenly this international consortium appeared.
Right. Well, I thought that there was it was an extraordinary table of people from around the world. And I always had the feeling that good ideas would carry the day, and that there was a genuine sense of sharing, because we wanted to be part of something that had never been before. You know, it was almost the the George Bernard Shaw. You know, some people see things the way they are and say why, and I see things the way they never were and say why not. And I think that was the attitude, that we had an opportunity, that if we gelled together we could do something, that there would be a lot in it for all of us, and that we should put our shoulders to the wheel and our minds to the matter. And so it was one of the most exciting and transforming experiences of my clinical lifetime. I think I was in my early 40s at the time, but boy, it was exciting. It was exciting.
What made it work? Because it really, regardless of what people think about the result of the trial, the trial got done. Yeah. Many people didn't believe it could be done. It answered a lot of questions beyond what was the primary question, although it did give a clear answer to the primary question.
Right. I think it had to do with building a team, mutual respect, the fact that the people around the table brought different strengths, but that they had shown they had some spurs and some credibility in their own areas, and we brought different things to the table, and that we knew that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and that we'd better pitch in and give everything we had to this. So I think the teamwork, the people around the team, the people that supported us in the different countries, the tremendous support we had from the biostatistical expertise. I mean, Kerry Lee, who I hadn't met, to hear him reflect on issues about sample size and judgments about endpoints, and to have a representative from Genentech, David Stump, who was a creative scientist in his own right. One had the really feeling that the right people were together, and that we just weren't going to fail.
Well, after getting that first, very large 40,000 patient trial done, we went on to do a number of other trials together as a group. This went on for some years. Some people came and went. What are your thoughts about the teamwork involved, and reflections on what was accomplished and why?
Well, I think I don't say this lightly, I think that the culture that had been built at the Duke Clinical Research Institute by you and your colleagues was collegial. I think there was a sense that if we continued to collaborate, we could do things that few other people could. I think that also what transpired was that the operational teams that actually did the work and made the ideas that you or I or anybody else could come up with, that they could operationalize it, that they also saw that there was more reason to come together, so that there were a variety of personal chemistries at an operational level, subsequently in relationship to the statistical analysis and the other things, and there were dimensions of this collaboration that grew, I think, very in a very collective and synergistic way. And we liked each other. We liked to spend time and talk and work together, and the personal chemistries were terrific. And there were lots of questions that we felt, we were impatient to get answers to, and there seemed to be new products, also a lot of new products that were coming, that based on what we had done, people felt, well, maybe we were the right people to. I think that was about the time that this experience, or this phrase, thought leadership, came into play, and I guess that somebody thought that our thoughts were worth investigating.
So along the way, Eric sort of left the group. What are your reflections on that? He's gone on now and is obviously doing extremely well in the field of genetics, and now in wireless medicine, making a huge impact there. Well,
I think Eric's contributions have been tremendous. He's I think, mercurial personality, and he's impatient sometimes with the environments which some of the others of us have come to not love but accept as the price of admission to get things done. And so I think he was looking for another model, another place to do his creative activity in, and I think you and I recognize that that's part of his personality, and we wish him well.
Now, in the meanwhile, you were developing an academic career in Canada. You went on from chief of cardiology to chair of medicine in Alberta. What about the world beyond cardiology? What do you prefer? You like the broader world, or you like the more focused world?
Well, I guess as someone who's sort of moving between career 4 and 5, I would say that there's been some schizophrenia in my own mind about this. At the time I was being recruited as a chair of medicine, as you know, there were threats that cardiology might somehow hive off from medicine, and the sense was that it was better to have some cardiologists as leaders of departments of medicine. And I was recruited to inculcate a research culture, to develop some new leaders, and I was ready. I had been a chief of cardiology for 9 years. In our country, it's traditionally been 5 and 5, and I've always felt that the best leaders make themselves dispensable and move on. So I was ready to do something, and but I didn't give up my day job. I continued to round in the CCU and be chair of medicine, but I did feel that the broader perspective, the understanding of the interdisciplinary nature of medicine, and staying connected across boundaries that previously we hadn't been crossing, with hematology and endocrinology and nephrology and infectious disease. I mean, when you think about where our discipline is, I mean, medicine is a pretty good home at the end of the day. And recruiting new leaders and stimulating towards a common goal, and that was a great ride.
So, if you look back on it now, what if someone approached you and said, "I want to be a chair of medicine"?
Timely
what
question.
advice would you give them?
Well, I'd say that it remains a tremendous opportunity. I think all of us at some stage in our career are part of a social contract where we need to give back, we need to reflect on what we've learned, and inspire and seek those sparks in others, and work towards alignment and a larger cause, and creative ideas, and so I think in the right time and the right location, leading a department of medicine is a very admirable and important role for a period of time. I once asked Gene Braunwald, who I was riding in a car with, as I was thinking about the job as chair of medicine, I said, "Dr. Braunwald, you've done this job, what do you think?" And he said, "Well, I think it's a good job, but don't forget where you've come from, and make sure you keep your oar in the water relative to what your expertise and primary activity was." And I think that was good advice, and it was something I tried to do.
So, the dimensions of Paul Armstrong, I mean, I think about the research career we talked about, the development of the academic perspective, and then the family life. So, 45 years of marriage, 2 kids. What is the family up to now?
Well, my wife, who will be joining me tomorrow night for our anniversary, is with our 2 grandchildren, a boy and a girl, twins, who are 6 years of age, and they're with my daughter and her husband in northern Toronto, but they were actually conceived in Beijing, China, because my daughter did anthropology in third world development and met her husband, who's a fine Chinese Canadian, was a diplomat and is now on faculty in political science. So we have a wonderful sort of cross-cultural insight, and the next generation, which is very exciting. My son, who is a writer and also a world-class sailor, lives in Guatemala, and he writes and has a small business there, and is, I think, very fluent in Spanish and very comfortable in Central America, and perhaps not climatically conditioned to come back to Canada anytime soon. Yeah.
Is that, I mean, could you have imagined growing up, I mean, you're describing this, growing up in a small town, pulp and paper mill, going to church. This is really hard to sort of take in as an all-in-one lifetime.
Well, isn't it wonderful that it doesn't matter where you grow up. I mean, if you're inspired and you're given the opportunity, all things are possible. I mean, I do look back and think, wow, how did all of this happen? I mean, I guess all of us, I mean, Rob, it's so privileged to be able to do what we do. And as I tell the young people when I'm asked to talk about career development, I say, you know, if there's a better job in the world than the one I've had, I don't know what it is. I mean, nobody tells you what to think. You're only your energy, your wit, your resources, your creativity. I mean, you're a pluripotential stem cell. You can do, you know, it's amazing. It's just what a privilege.
So we've looked back for most of the interview, but let's look forward now. How old are you now, Paul?
Well, I'm approaching my 70th year. But I don't feel like that. But it is pretty amazing how many rings are around the tree. The university owns half of me now, not all of me. And I'm spending more leisure time reading and sailing. But I'm also spending more time with mentoring of young people and developing their careers. But as I think I may have told you, I've been very involved in trying to create something that I admire in your country, the Institute of Medicine. And so I founded, as the president, an organization called the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences 7 years ago. And I'm spending a fair amount of time seeing that organization take on challenges that are of public policy and importance, I think, to our public and our healthcare system. We've just commissioned a forum to look at the last 100 days of life and how we should engage the public and the profession and the families and how to think about this and maybe think wiser and well in a more compassionate and sensible way. So I think I see some questions that need answering and some ways of engaging people at a broader sort of public policy way that I'd like to be involved with. But man, I still love caring for patients, and I still love doing cardiovascular research, and I still love engaging the young people.
So you're basically having a good time doing what you want to do.
I'm having a blast.
So if let's say a young person like my son who's getting ready to start medical school next year came to you and said, gee, you know, Dr. Armstrong, how should I think about my career? What would you tell him?
I tell him that he needs to find the passion within. He needs to attend to what I hope would be a curiosity to explore, that he needs to have a healthy impatience for change in the status quo, and he needs to point his energies and his ideas in a direction that helps people and at the same time is gratifying for him, and that I think the medical profession and a career in medicine offers opportunities that are as wide as the rainbow and the spectrum of colors and the ways of not only engaging yourself but reinventing yourself along the way are extraordinary. There isn't a better job in the world, Rob.
That's a good way to end this interview, Paul. It's been tremendous talking with you. Look forward to many more years of working together.
Thank you.